Hello and welcome to another episode of the Intro to Kdenlive. Okay, the last two times we talked about transitions and effects. Now one of the transitions that I used most often is called composite. Basically what compositing does is it allows you to take two layers, be them images, videos, whatever, and lay them on top of each other in some way. Not just two layers necessarily, but two layers is the most common way to do it. I use compositing in almost every one of my videos. Now one of the most common ways to use compositing is to use blue or green screen, Chromakey. Basically what you do with that is you take a video of yourself in front of one solid color that's really bright, like a bright blue or a bright green. It's actually really cheap and really easy to get a green screen set up. I went to IKEA a few months ago and I actually picked up this green blanket. It's bright green on one side and it's bright yellow on the other side. The green side is so bright color that it's very easy to key out. And with all that said, I'm going to go ahead and switch over to the screencast so we can walk through how to use compositing and how to use the blue screen effect within Kdenlive. Okay, so as you'll see here, I've already got my copy of Kdenlive pulled up, and I've got a couple of clips that I've already added to my project. I've got this one clip where I am standing in front of a green screen. I've got two other clips that I'm going to use as a background. Now, of course, let's go ahead and we'll just take a small portion of this. Basically, after I get myself settled in front of the screen, we'll cut this section out and drag it into the timeline. This is always going to be our top layer. And then we will take one of these two, doesn't matter which, and drag it down to the bottom. So now we've got two video layers on top of each other, and what I'm going to do is go to the corner of this one, or right click on it, either way, and go to Add Transition. If I click the green arrow, it does the same thing. Add Transition Composite. You'll see here it adds a little yellow box. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in on that with this little zoom bar, and I'm going to drag this out to where it's the same length as the clip that I'm using. And just for the fun of it, I'm going to go ahead and shrink down this background clip. By the way, the background clip I'm using, I went to pond5.com, P-O-N-D, the number 5.com. They provide one free clip per week, and you can purchase however many other clips you want. Not sure how expensive they are. But now that I've added the composite transition, I can actually move the red box here, and it will take the top layer and move it wherever I want to over the bottom. You see, if I drag it, it moves me around the screen. In the same way, I can click in a corner of the box. You see it changes to the double arrow there. And if I click and drag, it will actually become smaller. Now, that's handy, but I kind of like to be able to do it at a set amount. So if I click this little cog right here and go down to resize, you've got set amounts. So I can say 50%, I can say 100, I can do the original size, I can even do a custom size. So if I wanted 75%, there we go, and I can move it around. I can also click here and align it anywhere I want to on the screen. So if I want to plane in the center, there we go. Just playing it back, and you'll see there I've got one item over top of the other. It's a little bit jerky just because that's the way the Kdenlive works. You start putting a lot of stuff on the screen, it's going to be a little jerky. Once you render it, it won't be. Realistically, that's a lot of what you're going to be doing with compositing. One thing that might be worth mentioning though is the keyframe feature. If I go ahead and reset this to 100% and align it back to the center, you see that it goes back to where I am covering the entire screen. Now, I've got one keyframe already in place at the very beginning. That keyframe will last for the entire video if you leave it alone. Now if I click somewhere in this timeline, this is actually the timeline that corresponds to whatever the length of the composite transition is. Now if I click in here somewhere and hit the plus sign, you see it adds a little red marker there. That's another keyframe. Now at each individual keyframe you can have a different opacity, you can have a different position on the screen, you can have different sizes, you can do all sorts of different things with this at each different location. The biggest thing I like to do if I'm compositing one thing over the other, I'll have the video going and then I'll create a second keyframe and then I'll make it smaller at that keyframe. So if I make it, let's say 35%, you see that little red line it created? If I move it down to the corner here, from the time of the last keyframe to the second keyframe, it's actually going to resize it from large down to small. So if I go back to the beginning of the clip and hit play, you see very quickly it went down to a very small size and then it started coming back up because this third keyframe is 100% again. If I wanted to stay that size, I would of course have to go to the custom 35% again in that same bottom left corner. You can drag it around like that, it's not a big deal. But see now, I start at the beginning, I'm large, I go to small, I stay at small, it sort of moves around a little because I didn't do it perfectly. That's just one option. You've got so many different ways that you can composite things, it's hard to go over everything. Let's go ahead and talk about the blue screen effect. So what I'm going to do is remove all these extra keyframes that I've created so that I'm at 100% all the time, right in the center of the screen. I'm going to go to my effects list under miscellaneous and select blue screen, then drag that onto your top clip. Now you see there, it did something funny by default. It's supposed to do that. If I go ahead and select the color key and then click on the dropper, I can pick a color as close to me as possible, but one of the green colors because I'm using green. And there we go. Just like that, I'm actually keyed out. The lighting was not as good as it probably should have been, but that's pretty close. It's not bad. If the lighting had been a little better and the camera had been a little better, I would probably get a better effect. You see, I still got some green just from the reflection on me. If I'd had better front lighting and better back lighting, I was actually just using the fluorescent lights in my room. But now if I play it here, you see I'm over top of this background effect. Very easily done. Another fun thing you can do, of course, is go back over to your project tree, delete out the original background video you're using, and replace it with something else. See, I just picked out another clip that I've been using, and now I'm over top of some clouds. Very easy to do. You could do it with a plain color, kind of like Michael Buckley does in What the Buck Show. You can actually overlay other things on top of it. Now you'll see I've gone ahead and added another item to the project. If I add another track on top, right before the blue screen track, I can drag this item down on top of that. I can actually make it the entire length, just like I normally would. But you'll see this covers everything else up. So if I go back here and add another transition, we're going to add that composite transition again, which puts it over top of the other layer. But of course, when you do that, you have to make sure you select what you actually want to put it over top of. By default, it's going to try to do it over the next track. I want to do this over this number 2 track, which is this bottom track. And you see it puts it right here on the left-hand side. Because it is a square, you can move it around, you can resize it. I'm going to say, let's make this a watermark. So I'm going to make it about 30%. And I'm going to put it in the bottom right-hand corner. And see, it's where it's not a 1280 by 720 image. I'm going to go ahead and scoot it over some more. A lot of this is just done by hand, and not a big deal to do that. You can also set the opacity down if I wanted to make this about 50%, so it's still there, but it's not completely obnoxious. And now I've got a watermark on my image. And basically all that was is I created a new track, I composited the item over this track number 2, and made it smaller and added opacity to it. And again, if you wanted to have some fun with this, you can add keyframes. See, I added one here where it's going to be in the bottom right hand corner. If I go back to the first one and resize it to 100% and align it with the center and take the opacity back up to 100%, might have to do this by hand a little bit, I could actually start out my video with my image right here real big in the center, and by the time it gets down here to the corner, it's small and it's opaque. So by this point you should be able to see there's a ton of stuff that you can do with the composite feature, a ton of stuff you can do with blue screen and green screen if you've got the appropriate lighting and the appropriate background equipment. That's probably a lot to throw at you very quickly. Feel free to ask any questions you like in the comment section below and I will do my best to answer them. Otherwise, make sure to come back next week. I'm going to do a video on putting it all together. As always, thank you for watching and I will see you next time.